Okay, so you're in kind of a tough situation, right? Like you're dealing with some real big city renting headaches, and that's what we're going to deep dive into today. I mean, who hasn't worried about this, right?
Yep.
It's the Eugene apartment complex, and we're going to break down your lease renewal issues and this power bill, especially those
Yeah.
charges. That is just wow.
Yeah. You've given us a lot to go through, a lot of documents, and I mean, it really shows like a real tough time, emails back and forth to the Eugene management. We got Joel Aseka, Grace White in there, and then all the Meter G Solutions stuff, Bart Klopper, Brianna Yard, and those previous leases, like all the bills. It's all here. We're going deep.
So you're dealing with two really bad things at once, right? First, they jacked up your rent way more than seems fair, and then, boom, this power bill is like 3 times what it used to be. And the worst part is, both these things went haywire right when your lease was up. We're going to try to figure out exactly what happened, put all the pieces together, and then, okay, what can you actually do about this? We want you to walk away knowing what your options are and, understanding this whole mess.
Let's start with the lease renewal stuff. That seems like the beginning of the problems. In your records, we see the last signed lease for your place, apartment 37F, ran from November 29th, 2021 to November 28th, 2022. So that signed lease, that's our starting point.
Exactly. Now, fast forward to November 2023, and they supposedly start the renewal process. We see an email for a renewal offer, and you even accepted something online. But here's where it gets tricky. A physical lease, on paper for the next period, January 29th, 2024 to November 28th, 2024, that was never signed by both of you.
And that missing signed lease for 2024, that's Brookfield's weak spot. Because on March 7th, 2025, we have this communication from Joel Aseka, who represents Brookfield, right? And she's saying that, well, since that physical lease wasn't signed, you automatically became a month-to-month tenant after the first lease ended in November 2023. And this is important. In real estate, usually you need a signed lease, especially for a fixed term, Without that, any offer they made, it's just that, an offer, not a real contract.
And that's when this crazy rent increase hits, over $2,000 more each month. Brookfield says they gave you a 90-day notice and then raised the rent from $7,168 to, get this, $9,253. They say it's okay because your employer's been paying it automatically.
Right, but that automatic payment, you didn't set that up agreeing to the new price. Your employer did that, probably based on what the Eugene told them. This automatic payment isn't the same as you saying yes to that huge increase, especially with you fighting that other big bill at the same time.
And then it gets even worse. They send you another offer to renew. Now it's $9,485, and you can pick a 12 or 14-month lease. They give you until March 31st, 2025 to decide. And get this, they threaten a holdover case if you don't pick by then. And at first they hinted it might be even sooner. Just so everyone knows, a holdover case is what they do to kick you out when you stay after your lease ends.
Let's recap this lease mess. Your signed lease gone in November 2022. You talk about renewing, maybe accept something online, but no signed lease for 2024. So Brookfield says month to month, and bam, massive rent increase. Now they're pushing a new lease at an even higher price and threatening eviction. That missing signed lease for 2024, that's your best defense. And you were smart to ask for all those old leases. It builds your case, shows your rental history, and it's good for your employer too, because they're probably wondering what's up with these sudden price jumps. Right.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. This insane power bill. It shot up to almost $800, 3 times what you usually pay. That's just not normal unless you suddenly started using way more power. The fact that you were tracking your usage means something's wrong, like not just with you, but with their whole system, right?
Exactly. You're not just sitting there taking it. You're tracking your energy use. You have these smart meters on all your appliances, and they're showing nowhere near what Metergy is billing you.
The big question mark, as you said, are those AC units, because you can't track those directly. But even if we, are super generous with how much power the ACs use, $800 is still ridiculous compared to your old bills and what you're seeing on those other meters. So it makes sense that you reached out to Metergy Solutions, right? They handle billing and sub-metering for, well, it seems like at least some Brookfield properties, which might include the Eugene. And in comes Bart Klopper from Meterjecture. They schedule an accuracy test for your meter, but get this, they do it in an electrical closet on the 35th floor. And you were totally right to question that, but of how accurate it is, and even more so, where they did it. Your apartment, 37F, is right next to the elevator machine room. That's a huge red flag for maybe sharing power, right?
Absolutely. You thought, hey, maybe my place is paying for the electricity for things like the elevators, and that's totally reasonable. You even suggested they put in a deduct meter if that's happening. A deduct meter is a separate meter just for those shared areas so that tenants only pay for what they use in their own place. And you aren't the only one worried about this. We see that a Brookfield engineer, the one at 2 Manhattan West, also thought that bill was too high and was concerned about the elevator situation. So even Brookfield knows something might be off about how the electricity is set up in this building.
It gets better. Almost all your neighbors on the 37th floor, their bills were normal. Only one other person, apartment 37C, right on the other side of that elevator room, said their bill was also sky high and that they were going to call metergy. This really makes it seem like something's wrong with those units next to the elevator room.
Smart move, asking for a meter reading for those untracked appliances, the ACs, and you also wanted them to explain exactly how they did that test. The documents show that Jolasica at the Eugene was talking to Metergy about all this, so at least management knew what was going on. But then Metergy says their technicians are too busy for any more investigation. Not cool, especially with these obvious problems.
Okay, and just to make things even more confusing, you were told not to pay that huge bill until they figured things out. Good advice. But then, bam, you get this urgent payment notice from Metergy. And you notice something interesting. It ties this power bill problem to your lease, even though management said the two things were completely separate. Makes you wonder how honest they're being, right?
Yeah, and on top of all this financial and contract stuff, they were also super late putting in those child safety things in your apartment. You mentioned that as another worry while thinking about renewing. It's like they just don't care about what you need as a tenant.
One last thing we can't forget, rent stabilization. Brookfield says, nope, this building is market rate, no rent stabilization here. But you dug deeper and found out the Eugene used to get a 421A tax break. That means they got a tax break for building new apartments, and usually some or all of the units had to have rent stabilization during that time and maybe even after. So this could be a big deal. You were smart to plan to look into this more with, the people in charge.
So, to sum it up, this is a bad situation. You're looking at a rent increase that might be completely illegal, all because of a lease you never signed, and then you've got these power bills that are just insane, and it looks like it might be because of the building itself. On top of that, they messed up the safety stuff for your family, and we don't even know for sure about this whole rent stabilization thing. It really seems like they just want to make as much money as possible and don't care about treating tenants fairly.
It's true. Now that we've broken down what you're facing, let's figure out what you can do about it. You have options, don't worry.
All right, so step one, you need to fight that rent increase and tell them you've been overcharged. And that unsigned lease for 2024, that's your golden ticket. You never actually agreed to pay $9,253 a month.
Exactly. Tell them, flat out, that your employer paying automatically doesn't mean you said yes to that higher rent, especially since you were fighting that other bill the whole time. You can ask for all that extra money back, the difference between your old rent from that signed lease, $7,168, and what they've been charging since it expired in November 2023. Remind them, neither you nor your employer agreed to that price hike. It might also help to mention Jola's email where she said they might have system errors with lease dates that could help prove they messed up the rent increase.
Next, you got to get to the bottom of this rent stabilization thing. Contact the New York State Division of Housing and Community Renewal, the DHCR, and ask them straight up, is the Eugene rent stabilized? Remember that 421A tax break. There's a good chance your apartment should have rent stabilization. And if you're right, that changes everything. Those rent increases could be illegal and you'd have way more protection under the law.
Third, use those ongoing problems to your advantage. That huge power bill that might be their fault because of the building and the delays with the child safety stuff, those are reasons to negotiate your lease renewal. At the very least, you can say, hey, keep the rent the same until you fix these problems. Brookfield hasn't been a good landlord here.
Your fourth option, just don't sign that new lease for $9,485, especially with everything else going on in that rent increase you're fighting. But be careful, if you do that, Brookfield might try to evict you through a holdover case.
Which brings us to option 5. Be ready to defend yourself if they do try to evict you. If Brookfield takes you to court, you have ammo. You can argue that the notices they gave you about the rent increase or ending your tenancy were messed up, like the timing was wrong or they didn't have the right info. In New York, landlords have to follow strict rules for those notices, especially with month-to-month tenants.
You can also say they violated the warranty of habitability. That's a big deal in New York. Landlords have to provide a safe and livable place. Those crazy power bills, especially if it's because of the building, any problems with the AC, and the delays with the safety stuff, all of that proves they haven't given you a livable apartment.
Plus, if they try to evict you after you complained and tried to fix these things, you can say it's retaliation, which is illegal. Landlords can't punish tenants for standing up for their rights or reporting problems. And last but not least, if the DHCR says you do have rent stabilization, then Brookfield has to prove they have a good reason to kick you out, and an unfair, maybe illegal rent increase, that won't cut it.
Number 6, take that power bill issue to the next level. File a formal complaint with the New York State Public Service Commission, the PSC. They're the ones who regulate all that utility stuff. You think the meter test was wrong, and you think you're paying for shared electricity? That's serious. And when you file, include everything, especially that urgent payment notice for Metergy. That goes against what management said about the power bill being separate from the lease. Sounds like they're trying to force you to pay a messed up bill by threatening eviction.
Lastly, talk to your neighbor in 37C, the one with the high bill, and maybe other tenants in the Eugene who are having similar problems. Rent increases, weird renewal stuff, high bills, anything. If tenants work together, it can make a big difference. Sharing your stories can help you understand what's going on and support each other. There's power in numbers.
So, Kevin, you're not in an easy spot, but you have a lot of ways to fight back. Let's talk about what you can do right now.
First things first, tell Metergy to fix those billing errors and be firm. Ask them to explain clearly why your bill is so high. Make them investigate whether you're paying for shared electricity, especially that elevator stuff, since your apartment is right there. And, of course, demand a refund for all the extra money they charged you.
If they agree to another meter test, make sure they test your meter in your apartment, not some random one on a different floor. And tell them you want to know exactly how they do the test. Either watch them do it, or get a detailed report explaining everything they tested, how they did it, and what the results actually mean for your meter.
You've got that unsigned lease and the power bill mess on your side. Use them to negotiate a better lease renewal with Brookfield. A good place to start is asking for your old rent price until they fix the power bill. They messed up, so you have the right to ask for that.
This is complicated, and Brookfield might take you to court, so it's a good idea to talk to a lawyer, someone who knows about tenant rights in New York City. A lawyer can help you understand your rights, talk to Brookfield, and represent you if you end up in court. Lots of legal aid groups and tenant organizations in the city offer free or cheap advice, so look into that.
And if Brookfield doesn't listen, and if you find out that other tenants are having similar problems, you might want to tell the public about what's happening. You could talk to local news, reach out to tenant groups who work with the media, or even post about it online. Be careful with what you post, though, because of legal stuff. Sometimes, if a company knows the public is watching, they're more likely to fix things.
No matter what, keep track of everything. Save all emails, write down the date and time of every phone call and what you talked about. Keep those power bills, your own meter readings, take pictures or videos of any problems in your apartment or building, and keep any messages you have with other tenants. If this ends up in court, you'll need all that.
So to recap, you've got that unsigned lease, use it. That power bill is way off, make them fix it. You have options, you can fight back. You're not the only one dealing with this kind of stuff, and it's important to know your rights as a tenant in New York City.
Start researching rent stabilization for the Eugene right away. Contact the DHCR. Find those tenant rights groups in New York City. They can give you advice, help with legal stuff, and connect you with other tenants. Talk to your neighbors at the Eugene, too. You can learn from each other and help each other out.
Think about this. Why do tenants have to fight so hard to be treated fairly and get accurate bills from these huge companies like Brookfield? Imagine what would happen if tenants joined forces and demanded they be honest and accountable. It's something to think about while you deal with this mess.